Let's go!
What dropped on Square Enix's Twitter yesterday and what happened thereafter is pretty crazy. Definitely, I was not ready, man. So the biggest challenge of what happened the other day was that I was essentially like not babysitting all the information. You know when you like just open up your phone and you like see thing, oh, beep, 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 respond to thing. And that's how it is, right? You're not like, you know, engrossed in the internet so much that you follow absolutely everything that's going on. That's kind of where I was, you know? That's definitely the situation I was in yesterday when all this stuff was going down. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Cait Sith Meltdown 2023. What happened, why we're here, why people are upset, where the misconceptions are, and everything I learned therein, which is a lot. Here's the thing. A lot of people think it's just about a name and pronouncing a character's name. I was with you, bro. Listen to me. 24, actually probably a little bit more than that, a little bit longer ago, about a day and a half ago, I was completely with you. I thought this entire conversation was about looking at the name Cait Sith, C-A-I-T-S-I-T-H, and being presented with the argument for the last 20 years that people say that's not how you pronounce it. It's pronounced Ket-Shi, and it's like, dude, I can read. That says Cait and it says Sith, and they're like, nope, you're wrong. It's Ket-Shi, and it's like, wait, what? With no explanation beyond that. That's where the conversation has been to the very large majority of people for a very long time. This cartoon cat from Final Fantasy VII, you're pronouncing it the wrong way. It's pronounced this way from like the Japanese version, and I'm like, but it clearly says Cait Sith. What are you talking about? Ultimately why I made the gift sub bet even ahead of time when we were talking about it. Like, you know what? I'll bet gift subs that y'all are smoking crack that they're going to pronounce it Cait Sith, you crack smoking weirdos. And if I'm wrong, I will also be the crack smoking weirdo and be the one that will give in gift subs. But stick with me here because this story has a lot more context to it that you have to eventually learn about, which isn't just about, oh, it's not the way the character's name is just spelled. That's not what's going on here. There's a lot more than that. So when did this start? Jumping on the Cait Sith Meltdown Hype Train 2023. So this all began with item of evidence number 1, Square Enix at 10:30 a.m. I read this tweet like 30 minutes it came out, and that was all I read. Officially confirming from the official Final Fantasy VII Square Enix Twitter that in the, I guess, localized version of FF7, it's pronounced Cait Sith. Just so that everybody is confirmed, and it's like, yeah, of course it is. No gift subs, y'all crack smoking. Square Enix just does it. And it's like, oh yeah, so that's pretty much what we all thought, right? I don't know where this conversation eventually got to, where it's like Ket-Shi. Where did this come from? So what happens after this is somebody directly responds, how could Square Enix do this? The Japanese version has the correct pronunciation. It's Ket-Shi, and with like a video example, I'm like, and an immediate response, I'm like, dude, what are we talking about? That'd be like the same thing of changing Cloud's name to Kuraldo. That seems like a weird thing to do. In response to that, a lot of people were really upset. To the point where I'm like, yo, holy crap, are people, I mean, granted, I've had some interactions with Square Enix fandoms that lead me down a path of, okay, and slowly back away into a bush. So I'm assuming it's just that. People are saying that he's Scottish, and it's like removing his heritage or something like that. And I'm like, dude, where is Scotland in Final Fantasy VII? Much less where's Texas, much less where's like Korea. They mention these places in the game, but it's clearly like not in Final Fantasy VII. And yeah, he has like a Scottish accent. I'm like, we're talking about a fictional world, right? We're talking about something that's not real here. That led a lot of people getting very upset for reasons that I had no idea. And I get a lot of people viciously attacking me as being aggressively racist, and at this point I start reading these responses, and I'm like, oh shit, we are not talking about a cartoon cat anymore, are we? Suddenly this is not related to a cartoon cat in Final Fantasy VII. So I start reading all of these threads, and I start looking into this stuff, and I start learning that oh, Cait Sith is not a Final Fantasy VII character. Cait Sith is not from FF7, which, according to myself yesterday, completely thought that to be true, right? I thought FF7 had this character and made him up. I always knew that Final Fantasy games stole from, like, you know, mythos and lore and mythology and Norse mythology. All that kind of stuff was all over the place, but to me, this was all a cat and people arguing what the hell the cat's name is and people getting overly defensive about the Japanese pronunciation. Argument that, why don't we just name Cloud Corrado? To find out, no, Cait Sith is an old, like, folklore character, Celtic folklore character that has been around for forever. And it's like, oh, okay. And the way you pronounce that character's name is apparently like Cait Sith. So I'm like, oh, so this revolves around places with actual history. Oh, like all of a sudden there's a level to this story that is no longer Caitsith. You pronounce that Cait Sith. No, you don't. Like, clearly that's not what that is. To now, oh, this is based on completely different culture. Okay. Start looking into it a bit more and realizing it's actually based around a culture and a language, which is Gaelic, which I barely have ever didn't even know really existed. It's a language that is in Scotland that few people speak, that I thought it was something like Latin, like it's been gone forever. But no, it's still spoken by like a good number of people today. The pronunciation of this character's name is directly associated with that. Like the pronunciation of the character, the mythos of the character is Cait Sith in Gaelic. So I'm like, oh, well, that adds a complete different level of friggin' context to this stuff. I make a response to all this saying, yo, wow, I learned today that Cait Sith is a thing that existed outside of Final Fantasy VII. And much less its actual history of the character's name is associated with a bit of this game, a bit of this culture and this language. And it was like, for the past 20 years, I think myself and a lot of people were assuming that this was just poking fun at a different way of pronouncing a name because the Japanese version better, right? Oh, we should pronounce it this way, Japanese version better. And it's like, no, dude, his name is Cait Sith over here. Like, that's the translation of the name. To find out suddenly, no, it's actually completely based on a cultural character, a folklore character in some way. Here's the thing. It doesn't stop there. That's like part one. And granted, you know, me accusing this early on of being a dying language, a little insensitive. This is when I am being given this information as it's coming to me to feel like, oh no, a good chunk of people still speak this language. I was given the impression from people responding to me that this is like Latin or something like that. I'm like, what? Oh, okay. So I actually have to look it up to learn that, oh, it's a language that a decent number of people still speak and it's still around. So find out a little bit more. And where it goes is the fact that this language has essentially gone through decades, if not many years of erasure in some ways, where the language was actually illegal in Scotland, where people were essentially forced to not be able to speak that language for like political reasons. So now it's like, yo, oh shit. To the point where now I'm understanding that, oh, the pronunciation of this character's name actually ties back into a European culture that on my side, no clue has ever existed. And people are still trying to preserve the culture in Scotland or this Celtic culture in some way. So ultimately what's happening now is you have this character with the pronunciation of the name and the character that the way it should be, suddenly not that way. Now it's pronounced this other way, which was also possibly a translation error, maybe back in 1997, because FF7 translations were goofy and crazy and all over the place. I was having this conversation with people. I'm like, dude, it's Cait Sith, let's go. We all knew this. To the point where it's like, no, that's just like, we shouldn't just call the names, the characters, the Japanese names, like just because. To the point where, you know, I'm arguing with people about Scotland and I'm like, where is this conversation going? Dude, we are clearly talking about two different things. There is two completely different conversations. This is like 30 minutes later, two completely different conversations going on here. And to me, and I think to a lot of people, right? To a lot of people, this understanding of what's going on is just completely lost. I think most people, including myself, thought this was just about Caitsith. That is Cait Sith. You're an idiot if you think otherwise. That is what the past 20 years has presented. It's like, dude, it's Cait Sith. You're just trying to pronounce it like the Japanese way. To the point where I learned, no, the Japanese way technically tries to keep the same like phonetic language, like the way you pronounce the name, a bit more correct. And the English version seemingly just tossed that out. And they're like, oh, Cait Sith, right? It's just Cait Sith. So as soon as you get context to this thing and it's like, yeah, dude, I'm pretty surprised that any of this stuff was here. The toughest part about this was that I was in obviously like a hyper defensive mode because, dude, we're talking about a cartoon cat. Why are you all getting crazy defensive about a cartoon cat? Which is where I think a lot of people are still coming from without understanding the eventual context of the situation. And this is ultimately why, like, Twitter's a trash fire and the internet could be possibly one of the worst ways to distribute information. I'm trying to recite the situation in a way that respects the folks that, you know, still try to preserve the Gaelic language, much less the heritage, and to see that this is essentially just like a bastardization of their language in some way, just taking things from their culture and then just turning it in whatever the hell you want, to the point where it's like, yeah, you know, after I know this, right, after people are aware of this, you would look back at Square Enix's response. Oh, that seems like maybe a little out of touch, just to say, I don't give a fuck. You know, we're just going to stick with the original, to the point where, you know, it's not even, I don't even think it's that. I think they just established it for so many years that it's called Cait Sith. The worst character in Final Fantasy VII, called Cait Sith. Right. They say in FF7 Rebirth, but still, you know, they were calling him Cait in previous games and stuff like that. The craziest part was that I was starting to see other threads that were popping up throughout the day without any context to the situation. And a lot of other people were in the same boat that I was, going like, of course it's Cait Sith. What? How the heck did we think otherwise? To the point where other streamers and YouTubers that make content around these games were like, oh, so I learned about stuff like in the same way, you know, I got my information. Hold on a second, let me pull it up. There was something that was clearly present today that I had no idea existed before today. And a lot of other people were the same way. A lot of other people came out and were like, you know what? Yeah, this just seemed like an argument of just fandom arguing about fandom stuff. Square Enix fans just being Square Enix fans, but there's a lot more context to the situation that goes back to an actual culture that people still have to this day and a language that people still speak. I understand now where people were in my early understanding of the situation. Man, this is some goofy, you know, Square Enix argument again, to the point where no, there is a bit of cultural context to this. And hopefully me explaining that to you gives a bit of context in the situation why some people are upset. It's not going to be a ton of people, right? This isn't a huge, like, worldwide issue, but it does relate to a portion of people in Scotland that feel like, hey, our language is kind of going away. So what is my entire thing? My entire philosophy on life is inclusivity. I really hate it when people feel that they are unable to, like, enjoy things because of where they come from or what they look like. I think that's bullshit. I have tried, like, actively to create a culture on my channel, much less my YouTube channel, that is a celebration of these things, and that these things can actually bring us together, right? That's the whole point. Granted, it was fighting games originally and the arcade, and arcade and fighting games were the things that bring us together, and now we can, you know, actually have common interests despite differences, right? That's completely cool. But it's when, like, people start attacking me for things that I have no idea the contextual understanding of it. I'm learning the contextual understanding. I come out and be like, you know what? I learned from this stuff, and I was very surprised that this existed before, to the point where now if people still come at you and they're like, hey, you're a piece of shit for doing this, it's like, yo, I need to let people know that is exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to promote, right? The exact opposite. I'm just trying to get people into Final Fantasy VII. To be frank, the majority of this conversation, I thought we were talking about a cartoon cat the entire time, much less this cartoon cat ever only existed in Final Fantasy VII until yesterday, to find out that, oh, no, it's a thing that's been around for a long time, and it's like a folklore thing attached to people's actual culture. No idea that was the case. Upon learning that, it's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Really, to the point where a lot of people, right? A lot of people are like constantly still attacking me. There's a lot of contextual things that don't make any sense. There was quite literally somebody from either Ireland or Scotland that sent me a message seemingly saying that, you know, you better be careful. You better have somebody else start your car, insinuating that somebody was going to car bomb me. And I'm like, yo, holy shit, man. This is getting fucking wild. And I was not anticipating the pronunciation of Cait Sith to insinuate, you know, threats against my family. I wasn't. To later learn that the context of that is actually an old Irish or Scottish joke about some political things that happened in the 70s, and that's just kind of what I think people in Ireland mention. It's something along the lines of like, oh yeah, if you're a dickhead, you're gonna get car bombed. Because yeah, apparently IRA humor, right? I have no idea this shit existed. Similar to the whole Cait Sith situation, I was so like dumbfounded. I'm like, dude, what are we talking about? I thought this was about a cartoon cat in Final Fantasy VII. I want off this boat. I learned a lot. That person actually wasn't threatening my family. You know, ultimately, Cait Sith and the pronunciation of the name has a lot more deeper meaning behind it that I can hopefully introduce you all to, the people that are watching this. That, yeah, there's a reason why some people are upset. This isn't just what I assumed it was. This isn't a Titus or Titus, right? Which I understand it's Square Enix fans, so this gets into some insanely thing. My part of the conversation, here's how I wanted the conversation to go. Oh, you know, of course it's Cait Sith. Now let's talk about what's really important. Does he have a double jump? So later that day, being slam blasted into a cultural understanding of a Scottish Celtic culture that is essentially being erased and has been erased for many years, where very few people actually still speak these real issues, right? It was a huge whiplash, right? Just, whoa, okay. To the point where you know what? Yeah, with the context and knowing how this works, I actually kind of sympathize with people, and I'm kind of surprised that Square Enix just chose to ignore that. The Japanese name will probably still be Ketshi, closer to Cait Sith. It was just an absolute shocking day of constant attacks where I think that I'm talking about one thing, but the conversation is actually about something completely different. I was talking about a cartoon cat that can maybe double jump, and a lot of other people have context to a situation that is completely different. So what's the correct name? And here's the reality of the situation. The correct name is Ketshi. To be honest, the actual name closer to what it is technically Ketshi, from the history of which the character comes from. However, that was disregarded. That was disregarded in American localization. Why is the American localization keeping it that way? Well, for the same reason that Barrett is personified in the way that he is, which could also seem as insensitive, in the same way that Barrett in the classic 1997 game could have also been represented kind of like by well, this is sort of insensitive, right? It's the same exact reason. The reason is they're trying to keep it as close to the original game as possible. They did a really good job with Barrett, mind you. Like, they took like, oh, the personification of this character is like wildly just, you know, in the 90s. He really is. But the way, obviously, the performance of the character, the way he's handled, he's like one of the best characters in the game now. He's awesome. That's a similar way of the reasoning for Cait Sith. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they actually reference Ketshi at some point in the game. I wouldn't even be surprised if they just call him Cait Sith instead, almost being self-aware of the old school localization in some way. I learned a lot, right? I learned a lot. I'm completely in a situation where I'm ready to admit that myself, and I think a lot of people, had no idea this existed. But it does exist. And it's something that is there. I can kind of sympathize with that. That sounds like that sucks, right? That does sound like that sucks. So ultimately, I'm curious where a lot of the ire is, because it seemed like I was the biggest piece of shit in the world for celebrating the fact that Cait Sith was the way the character was. To eventually understand there's a lot more behind this than that. Either way, I still think that making aggressive attacks towards people over a character being named in this way is probably not the best way to communicate your story. I feel like this hopefully should have been like a teaching opportunity, but in most of our modern internet association, people don't look at it as a teaching opportunity. They look to it as an attacking opportunity. You guys are happy about this being named this way. We are going to attack you. Anyway, I think the moral of the story is that Twitter is likely the worst thing to ever exist. And just by the small haphazard of it engaging with a Final Fantasy post, the contextual argument of what goes on is so wild that someone can pick up on any individual part of the conversation with no context and look at that and be like, man, you are a huge piece of shit. And it's like, what are we talking about here? So again, Square Enix confirms it. Cait Sith is pronounced Cait Sith for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But there's a lot more to the backstory of the character, and hopefully I got to let you all know about that today. That exists. That is a thing that is around. And Cait Sith, being the pronunciation, the original character's existence outside of Final Fantasy VII / pronunciation, is a thing that actually exists. I learned a lot, to say the least.